A secret long thought buried has surfaced. Vernon and SHARON didn't just love each other in the shadows, they also share a son. As coincidental meeting schedules align, an anonymous post leaks on an internal forum, and blackmail messages begin to appear, Vernon's pent-up anger erupts, triggering decisions that could topple everything SHARON has tried to protect. Love, responsibility, honor, and truth collide like the last gale of a storm. Vernon wants to step into the light to reclaim his place as a father. SHARON will do anything to keep their child safe, and the secret no longer has room to breathe. In this video, we'll retrace every clue, from personal motives and simmering betrayals to the final turn that forces them to choose what to lose in order to keep what matters. If you're ready for the tightest spiral of this story, stay to the end. Truth has a price, and tonight, who pays it? Vernon believed he could control everything by burying the past in sealed drawers, locking it with the cold reason of a man who trusts rules and order. But the quiet return of SHARON through dense meetings, supposedly harmless emails, and coincidentally overlapping schedules, like choreography by an invisible hand, began to bend the proud pillar he had built. He was angry at himself because his heart betrayed every principle, angry at SHARON because she knew exactly which switch could light up the compacted memories, and angry at time for refusing to erase the traces, merely pushing them deeper, heavier, sharper. When he saw a candid photo of the boy, bright eyes but cautious, a jawline so much like his that it squeezed the breath from his chest, the anger turned into the feeling of being robbed. For years, the child had grown up at the fringe of a story where Vernon was an unnamed guest, acknowledged through blurred photos and denied through frigid calendars. SHARON faced that feeling as if standing at the lip of a cliff. She understood the weight of secrecy, the thin border between protecting a young life and demolishing everything else, and she knew that every decision carried a price no one could afford, yet she was tired of having allowed the story to stretch on through evasions and not yet that sounded reasonable. She was angry at Vernon because his presence was always a storm, loud when it hit and clinging when it retreated, leaving a humid atmosphere that was hard to breathe, and angry at herself because her heart still leaned toward that place, which was both wound and antidote. These days, their schedules suddenly tightened, projects intersected into a complex matrix, strategic choices forced them closer than safety allowed. Every email, every report, every cold number turned into a charged cloud that needed only a spark to collapse the distance. Vernon began to notice himself doing things he despised, rearranging meetings to share time blocks with SHARON, stretching presentations when she was present, mapping routes to pass through the air around her. He knew it was a chain of petty but dangerous choices, small steps toward the precipice. Meanwhile, SHARON folded herself into the rigor of work and built walls out of principles, but that very excess became an admission of fear, proof that the border between duty and desire was nothing more than a fine thread. She became the gatekeeper of a secret, guarding it while peeking through the crack. The more she tried to control, the more she lost control, the more she separated, the deeper she sank into the nameless mire. At night, Vernon sat before the blue glow, reopening an unsent email again and again, each edit only swapping the order of a few words, the meaning unchanged. He wanted a named role in the child's life. Each letter felt like a small, sharp knife reflecting the tense face of a man too used to commanding and too unfamiliar with pleading. He thought of the long years spent moving like a shadow behind SHARON's decisions, of standing outside a rainstorm, listening to laughter from a house with warm yellow light and never stepping in. Anger rose like bitter wine and pushed him toward reckless choices. If silence only protects a counterfeit balance, is it worth shattering with a public strike? He imagined the collapse to come, relationships fraying, bystanders dragged into the spiral, and above all the boy torn between adult narratives. The thought made him recoil, but that weakness triggered another anger, deeper, more toxic. Why was he stripped of the right to decide, even if he was willing to pay? Why must his love survive in the shadows of schedules and parking tickets? SHARON endured nights where fatigue turned into a thick smoke inside her chest and each breath scraped her heart. She looked at the carefully hidden photos, at documents and medical forms, at the child's handwriting, then weighed what she had chosen: safety, stability, a quiet childhood, but now that very quiet had become a cocoon binding every other possibility. She feared Vernon would blow everything open, feared his anger would burst every door, feared his visceral sense of justice would trample the delicate scaffolding she had built. But she also feared herself, the evasive gaze, the single reply that could draw her back into the old temperature where restraint melted. Her anger branched in two directions, one at Vernon, who never stayed still, one at herself, who never dared step into the light. The tension snapped when an internal project leaked in SHARON's name appeared incidentally in a security thread. Vernon recognized the perfect moment to legitimize his presence. He could resolve the crisis and position their private story where it could no longer be ignored. He accelerated audits, demanded access logs, requests entirely proper in the name of work, underlined by a quiet current of personal intent. SHARON saw through it, reading the barbed cadence of anger in each sentence. She tightened her principles and refused any special path. The standoff bloomed in silence. Two people trained to lead and command now halted at each other's edges, wearing discipline as armor and memory as a blade. Colleagues smelled something off without naming it, a thicker static in the meeting room, ice skimming past like two lanes waiting for the slightest wrong turn. The leak was contained quickly, but the anger didn't dissolve, it only changed shape, becoming a kind of static that singed their skin. Vernon was shoved onto the back foot when an old acquaintance sniffed out a hazy hint about the child. The meddler needed no details, only the scent of profit. A vague message arrived on a chat app, a promise to keep it quiet if there were considerations, and Vernon understood the secret no longer rested safely in two hands. His anger morphed again, humiliation at being cornered, fury at the consequences of years of avoidance. He stood amid three bad options: pay for silence, crush the blackmailer with power, or walk into the light and speak first. Each option stabbed a different organ of the story. He counted risks like someone staring at a rigged board, every move a loss. Meanwhile, SHARON smelled danger at the threshold. She knew Vernon, he would never let someone else's hands pry into his son's life. She knew herself, she would protect the child by any means, even if it meant pushing Vernon back once more. Their anger became opposing vectors, both accelerating toward the point of collision. The boy grew the way all children do, but here that growth was a countdown clock strapped to adult foreheads. He drew a family for a school assignment, 3 people under a simple roof, a stray stroke that might have been casual or a yearning with no name. Vernon looked at the drawing as if struck in the chest. SHARON looked at the same page as if cold water had been poured down her spine. Both understood what neither dared say: the time for stopgaps was running out. In the heaving blaze, Vernon drafted a path of change, a calculated sequence to thaw the secret with minimal harm, but in the final step he tossed the papers away when another message arrived, short and ruthless: "It will be told for you if you don't tell it." The sentence hammered the latch and turned his anger into a scorching flame with only one direction left: forward. SHARON, in a night longer than all the others, opened the file cabinet, arranged the papers that carried the child's life, and looked at numbers and letters like a river that cannot be swum upstream. She remembered every instance of rejecting a different path, every time she chose silence over explanation, defense over trust. Anger at Vernon was only half of it, the other half was anger at herself for letting the situation reach this cliff. She laid 2 scenarios on the table: speak and lose what she had protected, or stay silent and let the secret become a knife in another's hand. Both were losing, differing only in how to fail. In a rare moment of clarity, she saw that courage wasn't in who shouted louder, but in who accepted the cost of choice. The next morning, Vernon entered the building with decisive steps, as if dragging a storm behind him. He forced departments to approve a crisis plan, demanded stakeholders prepare to disclose a portion of the truth, and line legal files for an outcome no one wanted. He thought he was ready to pay the price, then saw SHARON at the end of the hallway and recognized the true face of anger. It had never been enough to cover the fear of loss. That fear said nothing aloud, appearing only in a skipped heartbeat and eyes dodging each other for a second. The old tug-of-war returned, both familiar and merciless, like a song repeated until the brain forgot its melody. He knew any move now would shake a part of life loose like a dry leaf. In the fierce spiral, a side event added pressure. An anonymous post surfaced on an internal forum, hinting at decisions in high places hiding a child's fate. No names, no proof. Only breadcrumbs sharp enough to gouge collective imagination. HR panicked, comms ran in circles, upper management demanded answers. Vernon was pulled into an emergency room and realized for the first time that his anger had primed the whole machine to explode. SHARON read the post with a faint tremor in her fingers, feeling the oxygen being drawn from the room. She knew, impact point reached. No more detours. No more glossy film. One afternoon, the sky darkened like a warning of rain. Vernon stood in an empty room where the panes reflected a man thinned by worry and hardened by rage. He placed a crisis plan before him, next to it, the phone with threats. Each object was a branch of fate, a dare to human endurance. He remembered the night's anger had devoured, the boy's gaze in the drawing, the dust of unfinished promises. He knew every road led to pain. At the end of that pain he hoped to save one thing, dignity. At that same moment, Sharon closed a file, drew the curtains, and watched her shadow stretch across the floor like a spreading stain. She understood she would lose something, perhaps her secure position, perhaps the narrow peace, but might reclaim what she had long let slip, authorship over her own story. Rain hammered like drums, sounds hurried, people in the building moved faster, decisions were shoved like the last pieces on a board. Anger had done its work, cornered them, forced them to stop searching for exits and choose. Vernon stepped into the bright zone, Sharon stepped out of the familiar dark, and between them a secret ran out of space to breathe on borrowed air. No one knew which document would lie on the desk tomorrow, which stamp would fall, whose name would be whispered in halls, but all understood the game of silence had expired. Negative reactions sprouted from the margins: suspicion, mockery, scorn, threats pulled taut, yet within that storm a thin clearing opened where a family might be named correctly for the first time. And the rain kept falling, as if the sky bore no blame for human contradictions, performing its old duty, washing the surface dust away to reveal the cracks that had always been there, waiting for someone brave enough to bend down and look straight. The night rain recedes, but the scratches it left on the surface of this story don't vanish, they simply dry into fine, deep fissures, ready to split everything apart if anyone places the wrong weight on them. Vernon steps over the threshold of himself, carrying the exhaustion of a man who has burned through every reserve to protect something that could no longer be delayed, the right to be named a father. On the other side, Sharon gathers what courage remains to reorganize a life like a chessboard on fire, with one priority unchanged: the child's safety, even if the price is her position, her relationships, and the thin shell of peace she spent years building. The internal chain reactions flare and then sink, leaving behind measuring glances, reports to revise, and memos that skirt a forbidden subject. Yet after all the dust settles, one truth is undeniable: the space once owned by the secret has been partly filled with truth, even if that truth is incomplete and still sharp-edged. Vernon understands this is not a moment for celebration but for maintaining rhythm, like someone who has steered a boat out of the whirlpool but still faces a long sea ahead. He resets his priorities, rebuild trust through action, construct a legal safety corridor for the child, and let Sharon set the pace for any further disclosures. Sharon knows the worst of the storm is past, but no one can predict where smaller eddies will stir: an old email unearthed, a scrutinized signature, a photo emerging at the wrong time. They choose to stand beside each other at a careful distance, so each step forward doesn't suffocate the other's breathing room. The child, unwittingly the center of the orbit, still goes to school on time and draws more houses with more lights and fewer shadows. When the video fades, the question is no longer who was right or wrong, but who dares to accept full responsibility for the choice they made. The story doesn't end with a door slamming, but with the careful turn of a lock by two adults relearning how to open a door properly. And if anything lingers at the end, it's the calm of a morning after rain. Not perfectly clean, but clear enough to see the road ahead. The rest belongs to time and to small, repeated decisions made day after day, enough to turn a heavy secret into a livable truth that lets everyone breathe.